Now we'll take this. We'll get through the whole chapter, but we'll take it in pieces. Um, and just as a reminder, now we went over this last week, but this is jumping right into the middle of this story where you have King Joram of Israel, along with King Ahaziah of Judah, who had gone to battle against the Syrians. King Joram was wounded. The battle was taking place at Ramoth Gilead. He leaves and goes to Jezreel to mend his wounds. Ahaziah is visiting him there in Jezreel, and that's where we leave off chapter 8, and then we pick up things here in chapter 9. It says, And Elisha the prophet called one of the children of the prophets, and he said to him, Gird up thy loins, and take this box of oil in thine hand, and go to Ramoth Gilead. And when thou comest hither, look out there Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, and go in, and make him arise up from among his brethren, and carry him to an inner chamber. Then take the box of oil, and pour it on his head, and say, Thus saith the Lord, I have anointed thee king over Israel. Then open the door, and flee, and tarry not. And so the young man, even the young man, the prophet, went to Ramoth Gilead. And when he came, behold, the captains of the host were sitting. And he said, I have an errand to thee, O captain. And Jehu said, Unto which of all of us? And he said, To thee, O captain. And he arose, and he went into the house, and he poured the oil on his head. And he said to him, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I have anointed thee king over the people of the Lord, even over Israel. And thou shalt smite the house of Ahab thy master, that I may avenge the blood of thy servants the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord at the hand of Jezebel. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab him that pisseth against the wall, and him that is shut up and left in Israel. And I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha the son of Ahijah. And the dogs shall eat Jezebel in the portion of Jezreel, and there shall be none to bury her. And he opened the door, and he fled. And then Jehu came forth to the servants of his Lord, to the servants of his Lord, and one had said unto him, Is all well? Wherefore came this mad fellow to thee? And he said unto them, You know the man and his communication. And they said, It is false. Tell us now. And he said, Thus and thus spake he unto me, saying, Thus saith the Lord, I have anointed thee king over Israel. And then they hasted, and they took every man his garment, and they put it under him on the top of the stairs, and they blew with trumpets, saying, Jehu is king. We'll stop right there just for a little bit. So, like I mentioned earlier, Joram, king of Israel, he's recouping in Jezreel. He had an injury. We don't know how bad it was. We're not even told what the injury itself was. I just said he sustained one, and he is, on the mend. But while that's taking place, God is moving things to bring about judgment. And what is interesting about this chapter is that he uses a one man to judge both kings, both the Israel king and the Judah king, which I find fascinating. And so God was moving things around to bring judgment. Now, God, a while ago, had revealed to Elijah that Jehu, this man, would be the one to bring judgment in that time, or rather that Jehu was going to be king. And that time was now. It was time now for Jehu to become the king of Israel. Now, we don't have the specific instructions in the text. However, the presumption of chapter 9 is that God had been the one to inform Elisha to go to the prophets to send this man. We're not told that, but again, that's the assumption. God had already revealed all this to Elijah. Elisha is his successor, right? The assumption is this is all God breathed and going out by the hand of God. And so God, again, my assumption, God sends Elisha to tell one of these kids. Now, we're not told why Elisha isn't the one to go. We don't know. Maybe he had other duties he was doing. Maybe there's something keeping him. We don't know. But Elisha sends one of these other prophets to go and anoint Jehu. And so this young man, he goes to Ramoth Gilead. And remember, that's where the battle was taking place. And that's the armies of Israel are still there. Jehu is there sitting with the other captains of the army of Israel. And this young man, this prophet, he comes in and he finds Jehu, and he does exactly what Elisha says. He pulls him aside privately, and he anoints him with oil, tells him God is anointing him to be the next king. And then he gives him another prophecy. He gives him a prophecy, I say of his own, but I don't mean by that he just kind of made it up. He is specifically called a prophet. This man himself is a prophet. We have no reason to believe that this wasn't God speaking through him, in addition to the things that Elisha had told him to say. And we see all these things come to pass anyways. And so he gives them another prophecy telling them that God was going to use him to avenge the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord at the hand of Jezebel. Now, it's been a while since we talked about Jezebel. She hasn't been mentioned in a while. But of course, we know that she did many, many wicked, evil things. And whereas Ahab is often the name that we think of, a lot of the detriment to Israel and now Judah that has come because of the influence of Ahab really comes from the influence of Jezebel, because Ahab, whereas he was evil and he did a lot of wicked things, he always did what Jezebel wanted him to do. And so Jezebel was, you could kind of say, the leader. And a lot of the things that are taking place now are taking place because of her influence. So this was going to be the time where God was going to bring judgment against Jezebel. And so he was going to take out the house of Ahab. And he says specifically, I'm going to make your house like the house of Jeroboam, like the house of Baasha. Both of these men were kings of Israel who had sons become kings of Israel, and then their dynasty ended because God judged them. Their dynasty ended and a new dynasty began. And so God is, through this prophet, is telling Jehu, you're going to be the means of the next dynasty in Israel. And it's not because Jehu is just this fantastic man, but it's because God is judging Ahab's household. That's what's taking place. And so he obviously prophesies that Jezebel would be eaten by dogs. This is something that Elijah was told as well, that he would be eaten by dogs, to the point here we see that she would not even be able to be buried. We'll see this at the end of the chapter. To quote Davis here, and I thought it was a good point, he says, sometimes it seems that throughout their blood-red history, Yahweh's worshipers have been bludgeoned into oblivion. But the text says that there is an eye that sees and a judge who takes note. And so, yes, Jezebel did a lot of terrible, wicked things, but it did not go unnoticed. It did not go uncared for. God heard the prayers of the people of Israel, those who were, still following him, and God cares about justice, and God cares about holiness, and God cares about these things. He cares about people, and so Jezebel was going to face her judgment. Now, a lot of times these things don't happen when we think they should, but that's because we're not in control of the world. We don't know all the things that are going on. And so these things happen when God determines them to happen, which is always the right time. It is always the right time when God determines it. And so when he returns, that being Jehu, when Jehu returns, obviously the other people want to know what was said. And it's interesting that they say, hey, what did that mad fellow say? What did that crazy guy say? That seems to be the kind of a general idea that the populace held towards the prophets. However, I find it interesting that when Jehu does eventually tell them what he said, they immediately believe it. And immediately they start hailing him as the next king of Israel. And so they like to think that the prophets were just these crazy men, but they also know, man, Elijah, Elisha, these other guys, they have said a lot of crazy things, and they always come to pass. These things always happen. And so, a lot of people today want to label Christians as, well, fill in the blank, right? They label us a lot of things. But that doesn't negate the fact that we have the standard of truth. And when we're speaking for the Lord and what the Lord says, those things come to pass. Not necessarily when we're giving our opinion or when we're speaking for ourselves, but when we're speaking the things of God, those things come to pass. And so Jehu now is set up. He's been anointed with oil. He's set up to become the next king of Israel. And so let's pick it up in then we look at verse 14. Verse 14. So Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, and by the way, that's not Jehoshaphat who was king. This is a different Jehoshaphat. And so Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Now Joram had kept Ramoth-Gilead, he and all Israel, because of Hazael, the king of Syria. But King Joram was returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds which the Syrians had given him when he fought with Hazael, king of Syria. And I just want to interject just quickly. All of these names, when you go back to 1 Kings, I want to say in chapter 19, when God has given the original prophecy to Elijah, all of these names are given. God says he's going to use Hazael to be the king of Syria. He's going to use Jehu to be the means of judgment and to become the next king of Israel. And so all of these names were given years prior to these events actually taking place, which again is God knowing the end from the beginning. But nevertheless, middle of verse 15, it says, And Jehu said, If it be your minds, then let none go forth nor escape out of the city to go and tell it in Jezreel. And so Jehu rode on a chariot, and he went to Jezreel, for Joram lay there. And Ahaziah, king of Judah, was come down to see Joram. And there stood a watchman on the tower in Jezreel, and he spied the company of Jehu as he came. And he said, I see a company. And Joram said, Take a horseman and send to meet him, and let him say he's at peace. And there went on horseback to meet him. And he said, Thus saith the king, Is it peace? And Jehu said, What hast thou to do with peace? Turn thee behind me. And the watchman told, saying, The messenger came to them, but he cometh not again. And then he sent out a second on horseback, which came to him, and he said, Thus saith the king, Is it peace? And Jehu answered, same thing. What hast thou to do with peace? Turn thee behind me. And the watchman told, saying, He came even unto them, and he cometh not again. And the driving is like the driving of Jehu the son of Nimshi, for he driveth furiously. And Joram said, Make ready, and his chariot was made ready. And Joram king of Israel and Ahaziah king of Judah went out, each in his chariot, and they went out against Jehu and met him in the portion of Naboth the Jezreelite. And it came to pass when Joram saw Jehu, and he said, Is it peace, Jehu? And he answered, What peace, so long as the whoredoms of thy mother Jezebel and her witchcrafts are so many? And Joram turned his hands, and he fled, and he said to Ahaziah, There is treachery, O Ahaziah. And Jehu drew a bow with his full strength, and he smote Jehu between the arms, and the arrow went out at his heart, and he sunk down in his chariot. And then said Jehu to Bidkar, his captain, Take up and cast him into the portion of the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember how that when I and thou rode together after Ahab his father, the Lord laid this burden upon him. Surely I have seen yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, saith the Lord, and I will requite thee in this plat, saith the Lord. Now therefore take and cast him into the plat of ground, according to the word of the Lord. And when Ahaziah the king of Judah saw this, he fled by the way of the garden house, and Jehu followed after him, and he said, Smite him also in the chariot. And they did so at the going up to Gur, which is by Ibleam, and he fled to Megiddo, and he died there. And the servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in the sepulchre with his fathers in the city of David. And in the 11th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, began Ahaziah to reign over Judah. And so here, Jehu has been anointed. He understands that he's going to be king. He doesn't sit around and wait for this to happen. Now, we don't know all that Jehu knows. We don't know if at this point he has a full-orbed understanding of the fact that God was about to use him as a means of judgment of both these kings. We don't know all that. But what we do know, again, is he doesn't sit around and wait for this to happen. He anointed him king, and as far as Jehu is concerned, that starts now. And so he tells his men, he says, Nobody leave Jezreel. I don't want word getting to King Joram before I get to King Joram. So y'all stay here, y'all stay quiet. And he takes, and we're not told how many, but he takes probably a pretty small contingent of men with him, and he heads down to Jezreel. And again, remember, Ahaziah is there visiting Joram as he's been wounded. And so he spotted that there's a watchman on the tower. Watchman sees Jehu coming, tells Joram, Hey, there's somebody coming. At that point, they don't know who it is. And so they say, Send out a messenger. And they send out a messenger, and the messenger asks him, Hey, are you coming in peace? That's what he wants to know. And Jehu essentially responds, It's none of your business what I'm here to do. You might as well get behind me. What I find interesting is that he does. The messenger does that. He doesn't turn around and try to get back to Joram. It seems that there was murderous intentions in the eyes of Jehu. And this guy knows I can do no good if I try to get in the way. And so he just gets behind him. And I thought that was so fascinating that the guy actually listened. He's probably just trying to save his life, but he does it. And so the watchman he sees is Joram. Our messenger went out there, but he didn't come back. I don't know what's going on. So they sent another one. Exact same thing. Second messenger goes out. Are you coming in peace? Jehu says, What's it to you? Get behind me. And he does it. And so again, same thing. He probably sees or can sense rather the intentions of Jehu here. But now the watchman says, You know what? I see how this guy is driving that chariot. That can only be Jehu, which is kind of a hilarious thing. That, he recognizes that it's Jehu, not because he can see him, but because how furiously he's driving his chariot. And apparently Jehu has this reputation in Israel. That guy knows how to drive a chariot. And so he said, that has got to be Jehu. Hearing this, obviously Joram knows, my commander's not supposed to be here. My commander's supposed to be in Ramoth Gilead. Something is happening. Now, at this point, obviously, we don't know if it's running through Joram's mind. Probably, my assumption would be that Joram thinks something terrible has happened with the Syrians. There's been, a new battle that I'm not aware of. Something has happened on the battlefield that I need to know of. And so he takes Ahaziah out, and they come to meet him. But he asks again. He asks the same thing: "Is it peace?" And then Jehu makes it known why he's there. He says, "What peace, so long as the whoredoms of thy mother Jezebel and her witchcraft are so many?" Now, one thing that's interesting about this is that Jehu seems to make it known by this statement, not only that something was about to happen to Jezebel, but by his statement, he seems to suggest that he is completely against the things that Jezebel was for. And so Jehu seems to position himself, at least initially, on the side of God against the wickedness of Jezebel. Now, it could be that she was just so bad that even the secular could see, right? That's too far out there. But nevertheless, here again, at least initially, he sets himself in position against the doctrines, you could say, that Jezebel was promoting. And so Joram could see, just like the two messengers, Joram could see Jehu is here to make trouble. And he turns to flee, and he cries out, and it's a good phrase, "There is treachery, O Ahaziah." He's right. He's absolutely right. There was some treachery. Jehu then takes a bow. He assassinates Joram right through the heart with an arrow, which seems to suggest that Joram didn't come out with any armor on. Now, again, we're not given all the details. It could be that Joram did really think he's coming to give me information from the battlefield, and he was not worried at all. Or it could be that whatever wound he was healing from was preventing him from wearing armor. Again, we don't know. But it would seem to suggest that he was not wearing any, gets shot right through the heart. And then very fittingly, they toss his body in the field of Naboth. And the field of Naboth was kind of the story which became the catalyst, really, of God's original prophecy to Elijah that he was going to cut off the house of Ahab. And here we're actually given new information that it wasn't just Naboth, but Naboth and his sons that Jezebel had murdered because, Ahab was just on a walk one day and saw that field and thought, "Oh, that's great, I'd love to have it." And Jezebel being Jezebel, she went and murdered everybody to give it to him. And so that was kind of the beginning of all this. And so as Ahaziah then is fleeing, then Jehu gives the command for him to be cut down. Now, at first, you might think, well, what does Ahaziah have to do with this? Right? I mean, Jehu himself is an Israelite. He's not a Judahite. Why is he concerned with Ahaziah? Well, God said that he was going to cut off the house of Ahab. Well, Ahaziah, through marriage, was of the house of Ahab. And not only that, we talked about this last week at the end of chapter 8. You see how influenced Ahaziah was by the house of Ahab. In fact, we're told in the last chapter that Ahaziah walked in the way of the house of Ahab. So he married into it. He was influenced by it. He was starting to lean Judah in the direction of Israel, specifically because of the house of Ahab. And so if God says he's going to cut off the house, he cuts off the house. And so here Jehu doesn't just assassinate Joram, he assassinates Ahaziah as well. And then Ahaziah, he is given an honorable burial. But as I say here in the lesson, it's more than he deserved. He didn't deserve an honorable burial, but because he was a king, because of his position, because of his relative being David, he got one. And then, well, we didn't read this part, so let's keep reading here. Go to verse 30. And when Jehu was come to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it. And she painted her face, she tied her head, she looked out of the window. And as Jehu entered into the gate, she said, "Had Zimri peace, who slew his master?" And he lifted up his face to the window, and he said, "Who is on my side? Who?" And there looked out to him 2 or 3 eunuchs, and he said, "Throw her down." And so they threw her down, and some of her blood was sprinkled on the wall and on the horses, and he trode her underfoot. And when he was come in, he did eat and drink. And he said, "Go now see this cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter." And they went to bury her, but they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. And wherefore they came again, and they told him, and he said, "This is the word of the Lord, which he spake by his servant Elijah the Tishbite, saying, In the portions of Jezreel shall dogs eat the flesh of Jezebel. And the carcass of Jezebel shall be as a dung upon the face of the field in the portion of Jezreel, so that they shall not say, this is Jezebel. And so what's interesting here, again, Jehu seems to be intimately familiar with the prophecies of God. For everything that we're told, it doesn't seem like the prophet who came to him at the beginning of the chapter laid all of this out. The indication seems to be, and I could be wrong on this, but the indication seems to be that Jehu was already aware of these prophecies. Now, if that means that just people in Israel were generally aware of them or not, I can't say, but Jehu certainly seems to be. And so Jezebel hears what happened. I don't know how quickly she finds out about this, or how quickly Jehu was able to get from the field where Joram died to the place where Jezebel was staying. But she hears about this, and she begins to make herself presentable. She's putting on makeup, she's doing her hair, she's doing all this. And when Jehu gets there, she calls out. And I'll tell you right now, this is not debated as to what she said, but it is debated as to what it means. And so she said, had Zimri peace who slew his master. Now we talked about, and I know it's been a little while now, we took quite a break, but this was a story that took place not too long ago in 2 Kings. But Zimri was the man who assassinated Elah, and Elah was the king of Israel. He assassinated Elah, but then only a week later, Zimri himself was killed by Omri. Omri was the father of Ahab, or the father-in-law of Jezebel, right? And so she says, had Zimri peace who slew his master. There's been a bunch of different reasons given by people as to why she said this. Some people think that this was basically just a taunt, that Jezebel heard what he did and was taunting him. Hey, you just killed the king. You know what happened to Zimri when he did that, the very same thing. Well, he was killed a week later. It could be that she was just taunting him. It could be, and I think this maybe holds a little bit more weight, although I cannot by any means, and I don't dogmatically hold to this. But the fact that the text specifically mentions that she's putting on makeup and she's making herself look nice, right? Some people seem to think that when she says this, it's not so much a taunt, but it's Jezebel basically giving him a warning, saying, hey, you remember what happened to Zimri. If you don't want what happened to Zimri to happen to you, the best thing you could do would be to marry me. We've talked about this in the past, but one thing that sometimes happened when there was a conversion of power from one man to another, the man coming into power would take over the harem of the former man. And that kind of said, hey, I've consolidated his power. I now run his house. I now run his kingdom. And so it could be that Jezebel is saying, if you want power, you better marry me. And she could have said that for a couple of reasons. Number one, she's just scared, trying to save her own life. Or it could be that she saw this as the best way for me to keep having all the power and influence that I've had over Ahab and his sons. Knowing Jezebel as we do, that seems, again, a likely option, but by no means can we say it dogmatically. But Jehu doesn't pay attention to any of it. No matter what she meant, he didn't care. And so he calls out and he says, hey, is there anybody on my side? There's probably a whole lot of people who would have been on his side, because there's probably a whole lot of people who hated Jezebel with a passion, given the way that she lived her life. However, here, a couple of these men, they look out the window, they show him, they're listening, and Jehu just says simply, throw her out the window. I mean, that's a simple solution to this problem. Just throw her out the window. And they do it. They throw her out the window. We see what happens in the text. She falls trampled. Jehu then rides the horse right over her, and the dogs come and eat her dead body. What's fascinating about this Jehu, he just goes inside and starts eating and drinking like nothing happened. This is just another day. All of this, again, I think that Jehu was firmly resting on the fact that this was God's design. This was God's plan. He said it multiple times already in this chapter. God proclaimed this was going to happen. I'm not going to worry myself about the details as to how it happened. And so here is taking place exactly as God said it would. And so the servants come in. He tells them, hey, go bury her. And again, this is just kind of a sign of respect for the position, not necessarily respect for the person. She is a king's daughter. She was the queen, right? Let's give her a proper burial. But then they come in and say, we can't. There's not even really enough of her to bury. And so they say at the end of verse 37, it was so bad that the people were going to say, or that they were going to be unable to say, this is Jezebel. In other words, the little bits of her that were left would not even be enough for anybody to identify who that was. That was the end of Jezebel, and this would have meant. This still means a lot, but this would have meant a lot more to a people who were very concerned about the manner in which a body was handled after its death. They were very concerned about proper burial rites, proper burial techniques, what to do with the body. They would have seen by the fact that she was trampled, blood, fell, trampled, and then eaten by dogs. They would have already associated that with a curse. That's exactly what they would have thought. And in this instance, they would have been 100% right. And so in the blood of Jezebel, then, the blood of Naboth and his sons, as we find out in this chapter, find proper justice. And a lot of times in chapters like this, people, particularly with modern constitutions and things like that, we read like this, we think, this is terrible. Things like this shouldn't happen. Why would God ordain for such a thing like this to take place? But then we read things like this in Psalm 83. And others I could have listed, but here's just one. Psalm 83, the first two verses of the chapter say, "Keep not thou silence, O God, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God, for lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up thy head." And then at the end of the chapter, the last two verses, it says, "Let them be confounded," them being the enemies of God, "let them be confounded and troubled forever, yea, let them be put to shame and perish." And then it says this, "that men may know that thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, art the most high over all the earth." In other words, Jezebel lived her life in open defiance of God. She lived her whole life openly defying the rules that God had laid down for his country to be ordained by. And as she did so, people could have begun to get the impression, well, here we have the laws of Moses. He told us what people are supposed to do. She's clearly not doing it. Either God doesn't care or he's powerless to do anything about it. And so God does things like this in order to bring glory upon his name, to show people, again, as we talked about earlier, no, he does care. He does care. He cares that his word is kept. He cares that she was consistently promoting injustice upon the very people she should have been caring for as their queen. And so God does care about these things. And so, yes, it was a graphic end, but it was an end appropriate and in keeping with the life that she lived. And so that is the end of this wicked woman, Jezebel. Okay.